Hello there. As you can tell from that intro, I was a big fan of YouTube in like 2012, 2013. I don't know why all my cats want attention the moment I've started filming. And my battery's dying too. This is a great start. If you were about back in the day, everyone did a Draw My Life video and I was obsessed. I loved them, I lived for them. Fuckers were uploading those, I'm not into swearing intros. People were uploading. They were uploading so many Draw My Life videos, honey. And I know it's not a trend, I know it might be a bit cringe and lame, and I also know that I've not done it very well, but it took me a good while to do. I've spent money on the fucking whiteboard and the pens. We're going ahead with it. Here's a Draw My Life video. I've missed loads of stuff out. It's really not particularly good, but I put a lot of effort into it, so I don't feel like I can just pretend it didn't happen like I do when other videos don't go so well, okay? So let's go. That's right, we are well and truly throwing it back. I really wanted to do this trend back in the day, so we're doing it now. So I was born on the 28th of March 97, which makes me 26 years old. And my mum always loved telling the story about how I was born green because like the amniotic sac or something had split. So I had eaten shit before even actually being born. And I was born with two brothers. I mean, I wasn't like born with them. They were already well born because they're 8 and 9 years older than me. And of course, my mum and dad, who at the time my mum was going back to college or uni to do like childminding and childcare stuff, and my dad was a support worker for social services. So it was the 5 of us, and I hated being a family of 5, to be honest with you. Everything that's aimed at families of 4. So it sucked a bit. And I was born in Chesterton, which is a very small village in the Midlands, in the middle of the UK. It's pretty much all coal. Big open fields with like little bits of grassland. More coal. A lot of coal. Hella coal mines. I don't know if we actually had that many coal mines or if we just kept going back into the same coal mine, but I spent so much time in like random coal mines. And we also had canals, which I'm trying to draw there, and also like it's the potteries, it's that kind of area. And we did have a canal boat at one time, but it sucked and we couldn't really afford it, so we got rid of it pretty sharpish. But my dad was the type that was always coming up with things and trying to figure out his next like big business idea, the next big thing that would like make us the perfect family, make our lives amazing. And he was constantly searching for stuff. So after the canal boat and after switching careers multiple times and just doing lots and lots of different things, he started his own business called Talking Therapies, and he ran it from the house doing like hypnotherapy and Reiki and all these different alternative therapies. And it meant that a lot of my childhood was just spent sat in a little mystic crystal tarot card shop in Woolstanton, just sitting there, occasionally going on the computer that we had and playing a lot of like thrivgames.com and the like. That's meant to be an ear candle, you can really tell. It was very lonely. That's the thing. I'm like, oh my god, I want to do a Draw My Life, and then I'm like, so my entire life has been very isolated, not very nice. I haven't enjoyed the majority of it. But that's the way it be. I wanted to do my little trend and draw my little pictures, and I'm doing my best here, guys. Like, at least I remain upbeat, even if we're not talking about anything upbeat. But obviously that didn't work out that well. It wasn't going to, come on now. So we didn't have any money. We never had money when I was growing up. My parents were like constantly working, and we still never had any money. And with my brothers being a good bit older than me, they finally moved out. And it was upon them moving out that my parents were like, it's the 2008 recession. I don't think we need to like stick around here anymore. Because I was also being horribly bullied in school, as you can see me representing there with those mean little red-faced people. So I was like, yeah, we should move actually, let's go to New Zealand. And my parents were like, why would we move to New Zealand? What the shit? We're moving to Denmark, your dad's Danish, why would we go to New Zealand? And I was like, I just love Lord of the Rings, guys. Like, it was either New Zealand or Cardiff. I only care about Lord of the Rings and Doctor Who. I'm 11 years old. Like, what were you expecting from me? And looking back, I learned a lot of very, very important lessons about like the world and about people and human nature in Denmark. But again, it was a really isolating and horrible time. Me and my dad moved over first, and it was one of those times where like at the time I was like, oh, this is brilliant. We've got Disney Channel. I can go out into the woods all the time. We go to the beach and get ice cream. I'm getting really into this franchise called Twilight, and I'm obsessed with vampires now. I was really big into reading and Hannah Montana, and like it was where I sort of like really got to figure out my special interests and get into music and just like figure out the start of who I was going to be in the long run, you know? Oh, it's a VHS tape there as well. That's where I started my VHS tape collection, which I've had to completely restart multiple times. And that's a swing set because I swung on the swing set like constantly. That was my favourite stim in the whole entire universe. I just don't get to do it anymore, but I got to do it loads in Denmark because now the kids spoke to me in school and we had a swing set there. And that was where I started to get bullied again, even though I literally couldn't speak the same language and didn't even know what they were bullying me for. I got real sad, and I was literally like 12 years old, and my parents were like, we're gonna have to take her to the doctors, and the doctors were like, oh yeah, she's got like extreme generalized anxiety and a lot of depression. And my parents were like, oh crap, what do we do? So we stayed there for a couple more years, and then when me and my mum were meant to be coming back to the UK on holiday for Christmas to see the rest of the family, we just didn't go back. And I was like, oh, thank God for that. Even though we moved to Rhyl in Wales, which is like honestly probably one of the worst places in the UK to move to. Definitely the worst place in Wales. Like the rest of Wales is so nice, and we moved to Rhyl. But I'd also convinced myself that like moving back to a culture I understood and everything meant that people were going to stop bullying me and I would be seen as being normal again. I wasn't going to have all of these like cultural differences, and I was still very much bullied, still very much not seen as being normal and being like the other kids. Didn't know what to do with myself a lot of the time and was just like, yo, like somebody please help. So that was when I first started getting tried on various different types of medication, and then my parents would get really mad at me for it not working, so then I'd get sent to therapists who were so useless. I had so many therapists when I was in school who would like literally just straight up tell teachers, tell the kids, like just talk about me. It was ridiculous. So then like kids would bully me more because they knew more like intimate details of my life from my therapist. Like I say therapist, it was like the school counsellor, you know? But by this point, I'd learned that I could really just use my special interests, even though I didn't know they were special interests yet, to get me through anything. So I just massively retreated from the outside world. By this point, I'd found Tumblr and everything, so I was like, I don't need friends. Sherlock didn't need friends, and nor do I. I was constantly reading fan fiction and watching movies and watching TV shows. That's Sweeney Todd and the Mad Hatter here because I really love Tim Burton. You've got a little lightning bolt because I was a Harry Potter stan. I was still massively into Twilight, but need to hide it by this point because everyone was like, oh, still a better love story than Twilight. And I was like, there is no better love story than Twilight. What are you even talking about? Super Hulock, all of like I was just such like the typical nerdy teenager, and it was fully a cover up for how like depressed and sad and alone I was. I was very like, if I have these things that make me happy, I can ignore how incredibly unhappy I actually am. I was watching Lord of the Rings like at least once a week, and like we're talking the full extended edition. Oh, it's the time I got into the Beatles as well. That's why I drew those four little guys down there. They're the Beatles, man. But overall, I was just having like the worst time, and I was super depressed and just felt like nobody did or ever had particularly cared about me as a person. I was convinced that was all gonna change when I turned 16. I just saw 16 as like the adult number. Like I always knew that like 18 was like the legitimate, like that's when you're growing up. But I knew that when I turned 16 and finished high school, we were going to move to Liverpool. And that felt like a whole new like beginning and whole new opening. I'd never lived in a city before. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to like, be going to college in the city as a real growing up. I'd said for years and years and years that I was going to move out when I was 16. And everyone was like, of course you are. Like, you're going to do music at college and you think you're going to like find a job and move out? Come on now, hon. That's not happening, is it? But I was convinced like everything is going to change when I turn 16. And that was also when I met this guy, and I thought at the time he was so cool because he was 21. He was an actual, adult while I was a literal child, and he played guitar and he was in bands, and he told me about all these movies he had seen, these different comedies he liked, which were all, really dodgy and inappropriate. And my parents weren't impressed by him. They were like, he's a little old, isn't he? And I was like, is my father not 11 years older than you are, mother? And they were like, Yeah. And then they broke up. They were going through their own issues, and I was like, okay, so you're really not paying attention to me over here right now. And I didn't know what the heck to do. But my dad was like, well, I'm moving over to where the guy you're seeing lives, so why don't you also move over to that side? And I was like, yeah, I should actually. He seems like, he pays attention to me and is basically nice to me. And while I was living there, my dad got quite ill, and suddenly I, as a 16-year-old who was still massively struggling, had to do everything for him and look after him and care for him. And I couldn't deal with doing that while living with him. So the guy I was seeing made the incredible suggestion that I move in with him. So while still trying to care for my increasingly unwell father, I now had to also cook and clean and care for this whole new man that was realistically nothing to do with me. But he was so emotionally abusive and financially abusive, and made out that I absolutely needed him and could not survive without him. And I bought into it, and I started cooking his tea and washing his clothes and doing everything he needed to as though I was his mother. Which I'll give did become easier when my dad died at 18 and I didn't have to care for him anymore. I hate that I drew his head with angel wings to represent him dying, but I did not know what else to do. I'm sorry to myself. But as often happens with a family death, suddenly the rest of my family that I'd barely seen in a good long while, and that my dad definitely hadn't seen in years, popped up and was so sad about it all. And oh my god, can you believe this has happened to us? This is the worst thing ever. They hadn't bothered with him. It was really weird that they suddenly showed up and there was a chance of getting money or items, huh? How strange. But I'd always desperately longed for my family to care about me, to feel like I had a family, so I introduced them right back into my life, and they constantly told me my boyfriend was awful and abusive, my boyfriend constantly told me they were awful and abusive. Everybody was asking me for things and I did my best, and it was just never good enough for anybody. It felt like everybody was constantly mad or annoyed at me, and just nothing I did was ever right. So I spent the next several years living extremely isolated. I dropped out of college because my boyfriend told me that he thought it was a good idea. I was just constantly taking medication, trying different therapies, just constantly going back to the GP and being like, I don't know what to do. I don't feel like I'm able to exist as a person. I'm so sad and so anxious and afraid just all the time. And my boyfriend at the time had been diagnosed autistic in childhood, and when it came to things like my special interests and stimming, he'd point out how they were autistic traits, but anything else could not possibly be autism, because that meant that he would no longer be able to use it for weaponized incompetence and to use it as an excuse and an absolute card to be like, how could I possibly cut anything to cook? It was constant excuses for him, but it played more and more on my mind, and I was more and more like, oh crap, maybe this is what's, quote unquote, wrong with me. All these other things that I've been told I have don't make sense. So what if I am autistic? And it made so much sense in my mind. And I got onto the waiting list for diagnosis. I went to the doctors about it. I started telling my family about it. And everyone was very like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. Why are you doing this? Especially my oldest brother, who was also autistic. Everyone was mad that this was something that I was going for. And I was like, it definitely seems like the most likely thing though. I know that you're all mad about it, but it seems very likely to me. So after a good long while on a waiting list where I just didn't engage really with anything, I just continued to live my life and be like, well, there's definitely something wrong with me, and I guess eventually I'll get this diagnosis or not, and be able to find out what it is or continue. And as it was, I did get the diagnosis, and they were like, oh yeah, you're definitely autistic. And I was like, oh wow, this explains so much. I'm able to put together so many pieces in my head that makes so much of my life just so much easier. And then I was like, oh, I've been given this whole new bit of confidence, this whole new bit of knowledge about myself. I understand myself so much more, and the people that are in my life are not good people. My family and my boyfriend of 8 years, by this point I was 23, 24, these are not good people, and I cut them out of my life. And it was terrifying having to move out, having to live with someone that you've broken up with for a year. Everything about the situation was horrible. But it meant that it was me and my kitty cats moving out and living life as an independent adult for the first time that's not being abused. And I started YouTube, obviously. I started YouTube a while before this. You can see there's a very strange progression that you can watch, to be honest, on my YouTube at this point. But yeah, I've managed to make some really good friends that have become my little found family that are much nicer and much more comfortable and just generally all around way, way better than my actual blood family was. And to be honest, guys, I think I'm doing quite well. Like, I still have my moments, and lots of things are still like way too much and super overwhelming. And I do feel like in a lot of ways my life is quite restricted and small. But that is where we're up to. What a depressing note. I don't hate my life anymore. It's not what I want it to be, but it's a damn sight better than where I came from and what I thought my life was going to turn out like. And, you know, I feel like I'm in a place where I can at least work on things to get to the place that I want to be at. So please do like and subscribe. I can't believe I actually managed to write this bit down. I was not expecting myself to have done an outro here. You can follow me wherever you fancy following me. Give me your cash, mate. By which I mean there will be links down below for my Ko-fi and my Patreon. You can also become a YouTube subscriber. I will also link my Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok accounts. And that's my alarm because my food's done, so I am going to go now. So whoever you are, wherever you are, hope you have a lovely morning, evening, day, afternoon, week, month, year. And thank you very, very much for watching all the way to the end of a trend that stopped being cool in 2015, but that I've wanted to do since 2015.